Welcome to this recording of a panel discussion on the current state of campaigns for the rights of migrant and refugee peoples that took place in December 2020 to mark International Migrants Day. International Migrants Day takes place each year on the 18th of December. Though it's endorsed by the United Nations, it tends to get overlooked in the calendar of important events. However, in 2020, it took place at a time of heightened interest in the situation which migrant and refugee people have been placed in across Europe and the UK by hostile environment policies. Our panel members are experienced campaigners across a range of issues concerning migrant and refugee rights, and in their discussion, they began to mark out the themes characteristic of their predicament as people increasingly being denied basic human rights. The panellists are Yasha Makanico, a researcher for State Watch and an activist in Italy and the UK. Frances Timberlake of a Refugee Women's Centre who works mostly in refugee camps in the Calais region of France. Khadija Najaloui, a member of a domestic worker support group, Walling Walling, and an activist in the trade union Unite. And Dorothy Guerrera, who works for the development and trade justice NGO Global Justice Now. The discussion was chaired by me, Don Flynn, on behalf of the organisers, the steering group of a London hearing of the Permanent People's Tribunal on violations of the rights of migrants. The main themes of the discussion were the policies currently being implemented at the borders of the UK and Europe, the surveillance which states impose over virtually all aspects of the lives of migrant people who have become established in a host country, and finally, the predicament of people who have been rendered irregular or undocumented as a consequence of official policy. As well as having a wealth of experience across all these areas, our panellists have clear ideas on the actions which are needed to challenge hostile environment policies and build momentum behind all those campaigns working in solidarity with migrant and refugee people. The discussion begins with Yasha Makanico giving his view on the direction of border control policies in Europe.
So, regarding borders at the moment, there's a very difficult situation, which we need to go back in time in order to realize how these things have come about. Because for over 25 years, since 1995, EU and national migration and border control policies have amounted to an archipelago of violence, repression, discrimination, and coercion that spreads well beyond EU borders into neighboring countries. And this is important when you hear people justifying the horrors that are happening at Europe's borders by saying we're allowed to check who comes into our countries and to check who we allow through our borders, because the repressive activities that are connected to this are spreading well beyond borders. So it's a matter of strong borders for people and a lack of borders for what's effectively are repressive activities, which promote discrimination in neighboring countries, which is something which is a problem for civil society as well, and particularly in contexts where regimes have their own human rights problems, and I'm thinking of Libya in particular. Even in member states, it has become obvious that plans to root out irregular third country nationals, I would prefer to use the term irregularised because it foregrounds the activity by states in order to kind of disqualify people, means an expansion in police operations and criminalisation to increase the number of deportations or returns, which is a main priority at the EU level at the moment, kind of upping the number of deportations which are carried out, which is one of the reasons for which Frontex is being given extra funding, money and powers, and for which the Returns Directive is being rewritten in order to undermine the legal safeguards which supposedly apply in application of the human rights. So this would mean the number of deportations or returns, this obsession with increasing them up to the point of deporting people, like in the Windrush scandal, who kind of are settled in countries. It shows the way in which increasing the number of expulsions is viewed as evidence that governments are doing their job in this field. Mm-hmm. While new migration receiving countries in Southern Europe were working to establish a framework in compliance with EU law, which means basically trying to establish that stark distinction between asylum seekers and economic migrants to criminalize the latter. Old migration countries like the UK were thinking up ways to disqualify and exclude people who had already acquired rights through issues like linking criminal offences to deportability, and starting from particularly serious offences and then slowly making that filter down to lesser offences, and as a way to increase the number of deportation. The conflation of issues like security and anti-terrorism after 2001 with migration policy led to a number of developments to harass people on the basis of their foreign appearance and or nationality in order to exclude them. A model based on discrimination came to be exported through externalization and what was called the external dimension of EU justice and home affairs policy. Mm-hmm. In particular, Morocco and Libya were two places where this was particularly evident. The model resulted in dogged efforts to neutralize risks, interpreted as anything migrants might do. In Italy, the 2010 security package instituted checks amounting to shortcuts to penalize and control people that were the forerunner to the UK's own hostile environment policies, introduced by Home Secretary Theresa May in 2014. And both these policies kind of tried to pass what is the situation of borders as kind of special areas where special rules apply.
Yeah, sure. I think this might be a good point to turn to Francis. I mean, I think your point about the way in which policies at the external borders roll right the way down through the system and creates crises at lots of different points. And Francis has lots of experience about what's been happening at Calais, which I think is our own local version of this. So, Francis, perhaps you could come in at this point and let us have your views on the way in which this crisis has rolled right the way through to the Channel ports over the course of the last year.
Yeah, thank you, Don. And thanks for organising the event. It's really great to be speaking here aside other really great activists, so thank you. And yeah, I think it follows on directly from what Yasha was saying actually about, I guess, a Europe-wide model and globalised model of border externalisation and exported border controls, which is, as you said, one that the UK has been experimenting with for the last 30 to 40 years. And which has resulted directly in the current situation that we see, not just in Calais, but across the northern French coastline and up into Belgium as well, spreading as far as Paris, by which people are forced to live in inhuman, degrading conditions whilst seeking out some way to cross to the UK. So I thought it might be good to give a kind of historical background, or at least a brief background to how this has happened, and particularly given the kind of hyper visibilization of the issue of small boat crossings at the moment, why this has become an important thing and how it's kind of been avoidable for the last 30 years. So as far back as 1986, there was a first bilateral agreement between the UK and France, which basically exported the UK's, it was the creation of the Channel Tunnel, by which the UK succeeded in exporting its border controls into French territory. And this was a model that was continued and kind of concretized through further bilateral agreements between the two countries. And has resulted in the UK being able to externalize not only its border controls, but also its detention centres. There's 4 UK detention centres operated in northern France, short-term facilities, but detention centres nonetheless. Have 24/7 personnel, armed personnel in northern France, and be able to affect border controls and effectively deny leave to remain across French territory. So starting off in Calais and Dunkirk, spreading to Lille, Paris, and Brussels as well, in various Eurostar stations across different parts of the country. This has come at huge financial costs. So the Minister for Immigration recently announced or gave out the information that it was they spent since 2014 £192 million just on securing the border around Calais. So just on extra security and surveillance infrastructure across the northern French coast. And excessive securitization measures and policing measures operated by French authorities but financed by the UK. So this trend over the last 30 years has led to a kind of decrease or dehumanization of the living conditions, and as well as increasingly risky route taking by people trying to cross to the UK. So traditionally it was people crossing in lorries. That became more and more difficult due to security measures. So people started in refrigerated lorries. And more recently, of course, we've seen people trying in small boats, which is not a new phenomenon, but it's an increasingly common one and an increasingly mediatized one. And so I think what I'm trying to show is that the model of externalized borders and of kind of exported security by the UK has led to a very predictable and fatal, in the literal sense of the term, model by which people are forced to live in degrading conditions and take life-threatening and often life-taking routes across the Channel. And yeah, I'd point to the recent report by the Institute of Race Relations, and I know in collaboration with other organisations as well, on deaths specifically at the UK-France border, which is a kind of horribly morbid but really important report, giving voice to some of the people that have died at this border, of which they document 290 since 1999, which is a shocking figure and one which we don't hear about often. So yeah, I think that's a kind of overview of how the border currently functions. I think everyone's probably quite aware of the coverage in the media and the living conditions. But happy to answer further questions on it later.
Thanks, Francis. Yeah, and I think it just goes on. In fact, I think one of the things that shocked me today was reading that 29 people during the course of this year have died in asylum accommodation. So, and the actual fact that you seem to be at a greater threat of death in accommodation which is provided by the Home Office than you are on a small boat crossing the Channel. That's a predicament that we've got ourselves into. Khadija, I wonder if this is a moment for you to jump in here. We've been talking about conditions that have been created at the external borders, and of course your home country is Morocco. I wonder if you've got any thoughts that you'd like to feed in at this point about what's happening in Morocco in terms of the efforts to its relationship with its border with Europe.
Yes, hi everyone. Basically, between here and Morocco, there's a big difference. The time when I left the country was in 2003. So there is still some difficulties in getting a visa. It's not easy. It's not easy to get the visa from our country. As I said, I have never been a domestic worker in my country. But to go abroad, the only one fastest way to get it, to go abroad, to go to Dubai. So I get a contract to go to Dubai, which I was earning more than I was getting in Dubai. When I go there was a shock, is less, and there is too many difficulties because what have been written in the contract was there is a rules, but when we go there is no rules, there is nothing focused on it. It's just saying something on the paper, but when you go there is another thing. You can see different things, including the passport. I never hold my passport on my hand. They giving it to me until when like a few minutes to go back to the airport. When I'm going home. Regarding of the domestic workers struggle, in everywhere, not only in my country or everywhere, but I can see the big struggle as well here in the UK, because since when I came to the UK, I was having a right to change employer. But still, I faced a lot of difficulties, a lot of bad treated, a lot of difficulties even to get the visa. And the big difficulty is when you want to get the visa, you just focus on to get the visa, but you don't know the rules. You missed everything behind. You don't think about what's gonna happen to you if you sign the contract with not knowing what is written in it. You need to know what is written, but when to focus to the visa, like scared to lose the visa, because if you lose the visa, you lost everything. This is our life in the UK. But the problem is the others, the difficulties now is to how to change the visa.
Yeah.
The fees
are we are going to be coming directly back to this issue of fighting against these rules in a further segment. You've given us a real taster of what's to come in that part of it. I think probably at this point I'd like the last word on this border sections to bring in Dottie Guerrera. To ask, I mean, from the vantage point that you have working for an organisation that's looking at global trade and human rights issues which arise from that, and also being able to look at borders not just of the UK and Europe, but in fact right the way across the world. If you've got any comments that you'd like to feed in at this moment about what is happening with border politics and migration.
Yeah. Thank you, Don, and thank you everyone for joining us and sharing your time this evening with us. If we come to think of it, what is the function of borders? I mean, they are violent. People get killed crossing the borders. So what are the function? So most directly, actually, today's borders serve to exclude, and I agree with Yasha when he made his presentation. Today's borders serve to exclude people from the global north or from the global south moving to countries in the global north. This is a part of, it's not new, it's part of a long historical trend dating back many centuries. And if you come to think of it as well, it is the world's poor whose movement is controlled from the master serf relations in the Middle Ages through the electrified fences that we have today in the European walls. So the national borders now is to maintain in political economy what we call the global division of labor. It is maintained because, as also again what was mentioned earlier, to ensure that there are places in the world where labor will remain cheap, so that capital can move in and do their manufacturing, employ workers, and pay less. As what was mentioned by earlier as well by Khadija, for example, if you will compare the salary, for example, of professors in the UK and compare it, say, to Mali, that would be many, many times over. And by limiting the ability of workers from the southern countries to move, they are compelled to accept poorly paid, dangerous work. And also, the more recent time when neoliberal policies became predominant, this has intensified the problem. As capital become able to move around the globe more freely, businesses are able to locate themselves where labor is cheapest and least well protected, where unions are not allowed, or you will get into real trouble if you form a union. So notoriously, industries such as the garment industry, for example, are concentrated in countries where poorly paid workers are faced with often horrendous condition, as we can see in the 2013 Rana Plaza disaster in Bangladesh. And that's also on the other side of the coin. That is, if we come to think of it, the UK used to manufacture a lot of items and stuff that we need, and now manufacturing is not it's not plentiful in the UK now. We're shifting to different kind of political model. So the other side then is that this is also the very same reason why so many people need to move, because economic and political decisions are made in the richest part of the world. So for hundreds of years, Europeans have run empires, conducted one-sided trade or unjust trade, as we call it now in our trade campaign. They allow transnational corporations to dispossess and plunder resources from various parts of the planet. And many people in the global south are now saying the transnational corporations are the new empire. They can go anywhere, they can do anything with very little that governments can do to stop them from operating as such. So the massive wave of migration over recent years has these roots in dispossession of people by the devastating impacts caused by global capitalism, and then hundreds of years ago by imperialism, which have the roots here in the north. And my last point as well is that another reason why there is such differences in the condition, why are the south poor and why are the north rich? That there is also that reality that the developing world has lost trillions of dollars worth and pounds worth in capital flight to the global north. The political economy, the global regime of trade and investment and finance have made it so that the South becomes so indebted and in a way keep on producing low paid jobs, and at the same time we're sending back money to the north in terms of foreign debt. And in the era now of COVID, that will become more starker because manufacturing is down in many parts of the world because of people are isolating, or many of the manufacturing companies are closing down due to the ravaging virus. Then the income of the global south will be less, and figures being shown in the World Bank IMF figures are saying that up to, well, this was June, July, up to 50% of the export will be down, and that will increase the poverty even more.
So thanks for that, because one of the things that's being said about the COVID crisis is that it's because of the recession that's growing out of it. There's an expectation on the part of some people, at least, that migration is going to decline as a consequence of that, because as jobs begin to dry up in the developed countries, there'll be less demand for migration. But for what you're saying, Dorothy, it seems like it's the poverty gap between the north and the south which is driving migration, and for that reason we can expect it to continue in the future. One final thing that I think probably we ought to be covering, even if it's very briefly, and perhaps I can bring Yasha in to do this. The European Union back in September has adopted a new pact on migration and asylum. And Yasha, it's a lot of pressure here, but could you tell us in 1 minute what the main features of this pact are, and whether we should think it's a good thing or a bad thing?
It's well, it's interesting because they wheel out a new concept or a new idea or plan every 4 or 5 years, and the previous one was the agenda on migration, and this one is the plan on asylum and immigration, and basically it's simply ways to rejig things to save a model which is failing. So there appear to be a few slight changes, but the basic model of hard borders and a dogged drive to deport a lot of people does not change. It does not shift. There's some arguments are being made about the burden that frontline states have to face regarding migration. But that's been the EU project, because they're saying it's because other countries, the more far right ones, are not accepting any relocations. But the Dublin model is about placing a disproportionate border on the frontline states so that they will be quite hardline in fighting this phenomenon. So the pact is basically changing a few details in order to maintain a model which has demonstrably failed.
Okay, so there's no good news there, and in fact there are campaigns we're involved, one through the Transnational Migrant Platform, which is calling for a global solidarity pact. So please do have a look at some of the blogs that are going up there to cover that. You want to make a further quick point?
Yes, just a quick one. The European Agenda on Migration in 2015 was about undermining rights in wholesale fashion for so-called economic or irregular migrants. And this plan seeks to build on that without addressing any of the critical issues which have arisen, including deaths in the central Mediterranean and conditions in Moria and in Lesbos and other Greek islands, which were deliberately created by blocking people.
Yeah, thanks. So, I mean, that's a point I think that's been made time and time again through all our panelists this evening, is that there is an organic connection, a very close direct organic connection between what goes on at the borders and what migrant communities experience when they've reached what are supposed to be the safe haven of the countries where they're in at the moment. And I think this probably brings us to the second segment of our discussion, which we've headed the surveillance of migrant communities, the way in which these attitudes towards restricting and throwing up barriers at the borders has now become a project which I've seen people referring to as internal bordering of immigration policies, and which in the UK we've experienced as a hostile environment. And can I say at this point, it would be we're open to getting questions from anybody who wants to pitch in at this point. So please be using the chat facility to pose your questions, because when we are going to move into a final segment at the end where it will be possible for you to speak directly to the panel. But on this issue of the hostile environment, I think probably I'm going to bring in Dorothy back on this again. If we can get your sense, if you're able to sum up exactly the way in which the restrictive, repressive attitude on borders has become a restrictive and repressive attitude towards policing migrant communities in a country like the UK.
Yeah, well, in the recent report of the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, they have concluded that the Home Office, UK's immigration, actually is not learning from their past mistake, and that the UK immigration's hostile environment policy broke equalities law. And at the same time, and this is not the first report. There have been reports in the past that about the negative consequences of the policy, but it seems that the civil servants and government ministers continue to ignore those. In fact, an excerpt from the report reads, the negative consequences, so I will read it, negative consequences of the hostile environment were repeatedly ignored, dismissed, or their severity disregarded. This happened particularly when it was seen as failure to implement environment policies in a highly politicized environment. So they renamed the hostile environment into compliance environment, but it's basically the same. Despite also the fact that the Home Office is now being urged to launch an internal review of UK immigration policies, the mistakes, the continued disregard, and at the same time, it seems that the question of race inequality is quite a hard lesson to learn for the Home Office. The Windrush scandal also had a lot of report that showed accusation of institutional ignorance and thoughtlessness toward race had been directed at the Home Office.
Yeah. But I think this might be a good point to bring Francis in here, because Francis, when your work in Calais, you've had the opportunity to look at another version of the hostile environment as it's inflicted on people seeking asylum at the Channel ports. But also there's the distressing story of the little girl, Mordor, who's the subject of a Justice for Mordor campaign in Belgium at the moment. Perhaps you could say something about that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, to start with, although I guess the context of Northern France seems like a different context to the UK and a kind of separate legal system and separate political system, I mean, I would totally see it as an extension of the hostile environment policies that Dorothy was just describing, not just in terms of kind of policing and surveillance, but in terms of the wider political logic, which is deterrence and removal, I guess, deterrence, detention, removal. which is operated across the northern French coastline, as I was describing before, funded by UK authorities and carried out by French authorities. And just like touching briefly on the notion of surveillance, I think that's both in terms of infrastructure, as it is in the UK in terms of hostile environment policies, but also a sense of like community surveillance. So real encouragement on the part of local citizens or local organisations to kind of flag up suspicious behaviour. Most recently seen in a campaign pushed by the UK but implemented by the French for community kind of beach surveillance policing, whereby basically local citizens are encouraged to report suspicious behaviour on the beach, i.e. any non-white person seen on the beach, potentially with a boat, with the expectation that that's then an irregular crossing taking place. So yeah, I think it extends in really insidious ways. And in answer to your question, your bringing up of the Justice for Mauda campaign, yeah, so this is again, a tragic and really angering case of what is again the kind of extension of the UK hostile environment into northern France, but also further afield into Belgium. And to give a brief overview of an incredibly complex story, it was in May 2018, there was a 2-year-old girl shot through the window of a car by a Belgian policeman during a police chase of the car that was basically trying to cross the Belgian-French border to be able to get onto a lorry to get to the UK. So a family sitting in the back of the van that was shot at by the police, and the 2-year-old died, which was followed by a series of like almost absurd police cover-ups in Belgium. And a huge attempt by the judiciary to kind of cover up basically what had happened and responsibilize the policemen, which gave way to a really kind of visible at the moment campaign relating to pushing for justice for the family, but also pushing for appropriate response to the policeman who's responsible. The last day of the trial, the families waited 2.5 years to see the trial take place. The last day was last week. And so I think, I mean, whilst this seems like a kind of one-off and particularly exceptional incident, which it was in terms of the horrific police response to it and the particularly shocking circumstances, the general fact of kind of police total non-accountability in relation to migrant harassment, abuse, and death is kind of goes without discussion often, and goes without any accountability. And I think that's a really clear, I mean, yeah, there's lots of kind of investigative research been done into it, and there's a really clear correlation or relation between the UK's pushed border policies and how they're implemented by the French and Belgian police. Are basically given a kind of free rein to be as violent and as harassing as possible, as long as people are deterred, detained or removed, or worse, as we saw in the case of Mauda.
Can I ask, is there a UK support group for the Justice for Mauda campaign who can keep us up to date with what's going on there?
No, not that I know of. It really has hardly got any media coverage in the UK at all. But there is, I mean, for keeping updated, there's a website, Facebook page and Twitter page called Justice for Mauda in English, that posts both French and English language updates. So I would really encourage people to follow that, particularly over the next month or two when the verdict will be being announced.
Yeah, we'll try and get a blog about it, I think, on our website, which is www.migranttribunal.org. That's the London hearing of the Permanent People's Tribunal. We'll get something up there so everybody's got a bit more background on this campaign to see what we can do to support it. Khadija, a question I wanted to ask you, which was about what's been happening to migrant domestic workers over the months of COVID, because I understand that it's had a particularly bad effect for this group of migrants, to do with people losing their job, being evicted from, in the case of the migrant domestic workers, the place where they live is also their workplace. What's been happening, and have we had any evidence evidence that the Home Office has shown any degree of sympathy for the plight of domestic workers?
Actually, the undocumented are all the same. They're still suffering. We didn't get anything until now. We're still campaigning. We've done lots of things to put them in. But the problem is, since the pandemic, the all migrant domestic workers are in danger. Some of them, they lost their jobs, which will be in hiding and supporting their families. And also I interviewed like around 5 of them, which is saying something like you can't believe it, because sometimes they ignore the calls because they said we don't have money to send them back. So we ignore the phone calls, and they lost the accommodation because the landlords are scared, because they said, as you know, if they found someone undocumented, they will put them onto fine. So they don't want them to stay there. So they said, even though the little money that we saved, we just use it during the pandemic, during the lockdown. So most of them, they used to be like doing some part-times. And then when the lockdown started, they don't allow them to go into their houses. And I just hope to get something from them, because they are not recognized anyway. No one is feeling what they feel. We're trying to help them as well in Wallin. During the pandemic, they were like giving them a little of like to help them with the rent. They give them some food, trying to bring them together, like to look at keeping an eye on them. But this is not enough, really, because they are the very and much too much. They need a lots of help. They are the most one who need help, because we used to be and the crisis and the difficulties of migrant domestic workers, but we're not facing the same as they're facing at the moment. And during the pandemic, not only the undocumented are affected, there is illegal people, legal people, they are all affected with the pandemic. I lost my job as well, the redundancy with no any previous notice. And on the domestic workers, they needs to be recognized as workers, as they not, as nowadays, they're not recognized as workers. They don't have any right as workers. As I said before, I find out all workers can fight for their rights, can get the rights, but the undocumented and the domestic workers in general, they cannot access. They needs to be, but like I used to represent other workers, which I need the help. I cannot represent myself. I cannot talk. I can fight. I can go and do protests as we do before. I can, like we did before the cards, we stand on the front of the parliament. We done a lots of things, but still need to fight for it. Need to restore the rights so they will be recognized as workers. Yeah. Because as nowadays, the big struggle for the undocumented people.
Thanks, Khadija. And perhaps that's a point in which we can move into the final segment of this panel discussion, which is what exactly is happening with this this undocumented, unauthorized, irregular group of workers, because the suggestions that seem to be going through at the moment is that we have to anticipate a considerable increase in this, both from the effect of the COVID-19 crisis, where people whose immigration status has depended upon them being in employment, and the large numbers of people who are losing their jobs, and as a consequence losing the safety of a secure immigration status. And I think on top of that, it being in the UK, we also have to bear in mind that at the end of this year, European community nationals are also going to find themselves subject to what are now a very uncertain set of immigration rules and policies, and we have to anticipate that they're going to be affected by all of this as well. So Yasha, I think this is one for you, whether from the vantage point of your work in Italy and being able to look out across Europe, do you get the sense that the crisis of the undocumented migrants is getting worse, or is it or anything else?
I do get the impression it's getting worse, but that's largely because of a dogged determination not to look at the option of regularization, or as Khadija said, I think what Khadija said kind of illustrates the imbalance between Home Office policies, which are designated to consider migrants' problems, against what it actually needs to do in order for people to be comfortable and live well in a country, because there is a contribution that is made by migrant workers and also by undocumented people, because, as I said, they're not irregular, they're irregularized because there's a dogged drive to do so. And there was a moment, a glimmer of hope at the start of the COVID crisis, when a few regularizations did start happening for kind of selfish purposes. For example, in Portugal, Spain, and Italy, there was an intention to kind of carry out some regularization processes in order for farm workers primarily. Then domestic workers benefited from it more in Italy, at least in the Italian case. But there were some moves towards trying to empty detention centers in Spain, for example. That did happen to an extent, but it seems like everything's slipping back into the old rhetoric and the old coercive measures, etc. I think that Brexit is it's proof of how expansive this policy field is. And it is intrinsically so, because it's constantly looking for people to exclude and to disqualify. But at the same time, I think it's an incredible opportunity, because the measures that will be coming in will be about penalizing Europeans who live in the UK, like myself. I'm in Bristol based, I work for State Watch, and UK citizens who are in Europe, because I'm waiting after the turn of the year for the first Frontex documents, which will be talking about the risk of irregular migration from the UK. It's kind of a main obstacle to things changing is Frontex's risk analyses work. And it's at present, it's been given extra funding, money and staff, including a personal permanent staff of 10,000 people, at least it's envisaged. Hopefully the latest scandals about pushbacks in the Aegean Sea might kind of slow that down. But it's a driving force behind what they call the attempt to restore the credibility of the EU return system. And the EU return system, it sounds like it's no big deal, but in fact it's a plan for deportation of hundreds of thousands of people, which would be expensive, which would have an ethical cost because it would involve police operations targeting migrant communities, etc. And it's a key obstacle to any talk of regularization, because the problem is that if regularization happens, there's a risk that migration might not be a problem anymore. And the other thing that was anathema when in 2015 they decided to block everyone in Italy and Greece and to enforce the systematic use of the Eurodac database, that was because Italy and Greece had realized that the Eurodac database was a problem. And if they didn't fingerprint people, they could go to other countries and there would not be that problem of two countries being under intense pressure, because the numbers that were coming in would not have been a problem at the EU level, but they would have been at a national level. And then the EU and Frontex kind of pressured Italy and Greece to block them in the south and in the Greek case on the island. So it would look like more of a problem, but the numbers didn't justify it because there's 500 million people in Europe.
Thanks for that. Have we been able to link up with the participants from Status now? Are we in a position to bring them in for a a contribution specifically on what is happening in the UK? What plans are taking place there?
Hello, yeah. My name is Munya, and I'm from an organization called Regularize that seeks to improve the quality of life of undocumented migrants and migrants with insecure status in the UK by attaining them basic rights and a safer and more equitable path to settlement and citizenship. And as this organization and campaign group are part of the Status Now network, which is a coalition of more than 90 organizations and community action groups that are campaigning for indefinite leave to remain to be granted to all undocumented migrants and migrants who are and all those who are in the legal process, including those seeking asylum at the moment. And the campaign actually started, the Status Now for All campaign, that's what it's called, started as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. When this began, a group of organizations got together and wrote a letter to the Prime Minister and the government, both in the UK and in Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, demanding that a status be granted to all undocumented migrants and migrants with insecure status. And so this was formed around March. The letter was sent around March or April of this year. And now we're in December and there still hasn't been a reply from the government. However, we've been campaigning, doing a lot of work behind the scenes on a parliamentary level, and as well as on a local leadership level, because what we're trying to do is get a lot of support both from members of parliament, but also from people like councils, from regional authorities as well. So we've had meetings with the Greater London Authority to try and get them to support and really push for this to happen, because I mean, as I'm sure a lot of people here are aware, this crisis has really shown a lot of, has put a lot of precarious migrants in very difficult positions, because up to this point, there's a predominantly hundreds of thousands of people who are haven't received any state support when it comes to income, as well as support for housing, etc. So yeah, there's kind of a lot of work that we're trying to do at the moment, but we do need a lot more people to join who are dedicated in getting this this campaign, building momentum for this campaign.
Yeah. Thanks for that. I mean, you've been putting some of your information, your websites and things up in the chat box. So I would encourage everybody to have a look at that and to visit you and to see what can be done. Dorothy, I wonder at this point, I mean, from your vantage point of looking at these developments as they exist in other parts of the world, have you observed any experiences taking place in other countries, like America, for example, the United States, where it's pretty well known for its grassroots campaigning and its militancy on these sort of issues? Do you think have you picked up any ideas from there that you think that could be interpreted? I mean, for example, the obvious one is the idea of sanctuary cities, which are very, very big in America, where local authorities, faith organizations, trade unions, and so on, commit themselves to the defense of undocumented migrants. Is there any hope, do you think, that we might be able to take that up here?
Yeah, well, those initiatives are is one, and it seems that that also Germany is also initiating those kinds of cities and changing the local policies as well. But for us in Global Justice Now, before the pandemic and before at least very, very recently, we're also pushing for freedom of movement, because we believe as well that your place of birth, your nationality should not determine whether you will live a life of poverty or a society that could repress you or things like that. And also it is very practical as well, considering that for people from Europe or from the UK, a UK citizen can go to as many as 140 countries without needing a visa. and while at the same time the counterpart in the rest of the world, especially in the global south, could not do so. So freedom of movement should be basic, and that a recognition as well that migration is actually the last desperate attempt of humanity searching for a better future, improving themselves, making solidarity, and making solidarity should be a very practical option also for social movements all over. And I wanted also to stress that actually many people think that corporations don't want migration or the global elites don't want migration. That's actually false. The global elites and states actually in the global north welcome migration, but they don't want migrants to stay and have the same benefits as the citizens. So they welcome migration as long as it suits the needs of business, it suits the need of those who needed a mass pool of exploitable labor. So for people here in the UK, what the first line there should be that there should be worker solidarity with fellow migrant workers, and this has been discussed for 300 years already. That for workers to organize and recognize that everyone would be safe and have a better working condition, then that must be offered to everyone, that kind of working condition. And also a lot of the policies and that might happen under Brexit as well is all these studies of following either the Canadian system or the Australian point system. This again is another hurdle because migrants need to prove that they should enter the country, while on the other hand, British citizens don't need to prove that. I lived for 10 years in Bangkok, and I have seen that you get a lot of people from the north who come there, who enjoy buying condominium units there, living there for 6 months, enjoying the beach without proving that they should be there. So why is it a requirement for people from the global south to prove that they have or they deserve to come here in the UK or in the north? Lastly, as well, as we have seen in recent social movement gatherings as well, the dynamism in the labor movement. If you look at the May Day events in other countries, it's not so big here, but if you look at the May Day events in the US, in Germany, a big chunk of those who are attending May Day events are migrant workers. In the US as well, you have Corporation Jackson, who had been leading the strike, monthly strike with COVID. Under the condition with the COVID situation. Actually, I forgot to say, one of the things I'm fearful of is that with the rate of the COVID-19 vaccines is going around the world, again, the UK will have, in terms of what it ordered or what is already in the pipeline that will come here, every UK citizens would have 5 times vaccines available or the residents will have 5 times the vaccine available here, while the global south would need to wait for 2 to 3 years before they can have any. So in the future, it might be a requirement as well to getting your visa, like the same way that in South Africa you need a yellow vaccine to be able to enter the country. What if in the future, and I hope this will not happen, people or citizens from the developing world will not be able to enter Europe because they are not vaccinated. So that is another issue that is facing us.
Right, thanks. That's one thing something to think about. We've got a few questions going up here now about from Sarah Kiambi. And I know that in the chat line, the participants, we've got a lot of people who've got trade union experience. And I think that's a question I'd like to put to Khadija. Because Khadija, as well as being an activist with Walling, the domestic workers support group, you are also an activist with Unite, the trade union. I wonder if you could say something about the extent to which Unite has been able to assist you in your work, and whether you think there are some you know, general points that could be made about the way we ought to be approaching trade unions and calling for their solidarity with vulnerable undocumented migrant workers and pressing for their regularisation. Khadija.
Yeah, actually, Unite the Union is the things that from there where I got my skills and knowledge, because if everyone knows that I am from a Moroccan country, Arabic and French, and then through Unite we learned, and then this is the good opportunity for the undocumented. So when we have anyone, we cut them to Unite, we encourage them to be a member of Unite so they can have English classes, and there is a lot of courses through Unite the Union. And one in as well, they try to bring them together, and most of them, they're telling us now, we were alone, we were feeling lonely and behind, but with Unite, with the one in, we feel the same family, and then they feel the solidarity because we help them. We try to give them some money to help with the rent, because when they get out from job, how they can pay rent? When they can get the food? And all the things is they're scared to show themselves. We don't want to keep them to bring them up to speak to people. Most of them, they are refusing because they don't know what's going to be happen. They don't know maybe that we are going to share their stories or stuff, but we trying to tell them that there is secure. You are in a good hand. We are in the solidarity. We need to help you as we are, because we feel that we know what it is. And this is a good thing to encourage them to go to Unite, to be a member of Unite, because as Unite is helping migrant workers, they're helping the hotel workers in their workplace. There is lots of benefits, benefits to get from Unite. Through there, we have we are having a United Migrant Workers Education Program that calls AMWEP. So these difficulties, we have a problem because not all of the migrants have the chance to go and learn. No having a lot of chance to get the facilities for the Zoom now, but we're trying to educate them. We're still trying to get them together, and then we're trying to continue learning. As the pandemic closed, Unite is not free. We cannot go there. We cannot meet each other, but we still can see ourselves every Saturday through Zoom. But the problem is most of them, they don't have internet in their phones. They don't have computers. They don't know how to access to the Zoom, but we still try to keep us together and try to educate them how to come on and then to study, because English is very important. And we're lucky that we have the Unite and the project, the AMWEP is helping a lot of migrant domestic workers. So if you have a problem, you go to them, they can help you, they can represent you, they can give you lots of advice that still we can get advice through phones. Now, I call them and then I get help. They come back to me and they're getting the case. They're the one gonna write the letter now to the housing benefit because I couldn't do it. I don't know how to do it. But this is the very, very good point to join Unite and to be. And then I'm happy that I'm with Unite, with the one in as well, because we're trying to campaign to restore the rights of migrant domestic workers I have taken in 2012.
Okay. Well done, Unite, on that point. And yes. I mean, again, looking at participants, I know just looking at names, there are a few people there who have got a vast amount of experience in trade unions, other trade unions aside from Unite. And if you have got any points that you want to make at this point, how we could be making better use of our trade union links, please do indicate and come in at any point there. Let's see, Francis, I mean, have you had any experience of being able to work with trade unions at all in the activities that you're involved in, and with refugees, women refugees in particular? Is it a resource that you've turned to?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, and no, like the short answer is no. I think we've kind of thought about it a lot and always been, I guess, prevented by the fact that we work in quite a quite a transitory and kind of dangerous often context in which people are very reticent to be visibilized in any way. And so definitely not in the UK context, in that we work exclusively in France. But there has been, I mean, there's support from kind of local and regional trade unions in France for various causes that we've backed. And so potentially more, we've got more support from that end, but not, I think not with the, we've not explored it as much as we would like to, I think, and as much as we could. But I'd also take this opportunity to highlight, we've not worked with them directly, but highlight the movement called Gilets Noirs, like a black, many of you have heard of it, Black Gilets Noirs, which is a takeoff of the name at least was inspired from the Gilets Jaunes movement in France, which is basically a collective of undocumented workers, mainly in Paris, but it's spread further afield since, who's done some really, really amazing kind of direct action work around regularization and general advocating for improvement of workers' rights. I think most notably a kind of in 2019, an occupation of a large, very high profile factory in Paris. They've had some really big successes. So I would kind of encourage anyone who's interested in that to look into their movement, which I think has had some really, really set a really interesting precedent in France.
Okay, again, that's something that we ought to be looking out for. I mean, I've been making notes as we go along here of people mentioning things that we ought to know more about here. I think when we write up a report of this discussion, we'll see what we can find out there and provide people with more links and more information about that. This is one generally for the panel, I think. I mean, in terms of specifically on the refugee situation, one of the things that's happened over the course of this year has been the launch of a right to work campaign. I think the organisation Refugee Action has been leading on this. And it's been an attempt to get the government to back down on its long-standing ban on asylum seekers entering employment. There is theoretically a possibility they can do it, providing it's the jobs that they take are in a very narrow band of jobs. The vast majority of people are having to eke out a very precarious existence on just a few pounds a day. And even where they know they would be able to find work, where work is available for them, they can't take it. But how important do you think that issue might be in the future in order to take both to employers? I mean, Dorothy, you mentioned the fact that employers are open to the idea of employing migrants. The trade unions as well. To what extent can we get trade unions to back right to work campaigns? What are your views on that? I mean, Dorothy, can I throw it to you first of all?
Yeah, well, that's why I stress that they welcome migrants as long as they are not allowed to stay, as long as there's no route for citizenship or to be a long-term resident. And I think a reason for that is that they if you would look at many of the policies where you have the point system or you have the kafala system, migrants are welcome as long as they only have a very fixed term contract. And that in a way works very well for businesses, because that means they are not obliged to train workers, they're not obliged to promote them, or they're not obliged to work for the papers. So all these needs must be fulfilled by the migrants. And sadly, it seems that policies that are being discussed now point to this direction. That now that we will be in Brexit after January, that's the sad reality, that migrants will be welcome as long as they don't have rights. So it is really a big task for trade unions to organize and include migrants in their organizing. because that's the only way that migrants will have the rights, if they will fight for it and they will be trained to, or they will be told that they actually have rights. And from my experience as well, with I've been living outside my country for the last 20 years. So I live in Germany, I live in Thailand before, and most of the time when I speak to fellow migrants, many of them are afraid to be organized or afraid to attend meetings. Either it because of financial reason, because they're working 3 shifts or 2 shifts, or at the same time they are afraid that once it is known that they are members or becoming members of the union, they'll be kicked out of their work. So there should be we have to push for a stronger labor law, that everyone have the right to organize and be part of the union. So that should be a demand as well. And also, of course, regularizing all workers.
Yeah, and we got a comment up here from Susan Quaver saying that trade unions should be organising and representing undocumented migrants on employment and migration issues. She says not many unions are able to do that because of the constraint on trade unions. What's the nature of this constraint? Why is it the case that trade unions just can't get on with the job of recognising that a worker is a worker, irrespective of what their immigration status is, and simply getting on with what they're supposed to have been doing for the last, 150 odd years or so, making themselves unpopular with employers, and when necessary, even being prepared to go up against the law? Why is it that unions aren't playing this role at the moment? Any views on that? I mean, Yasha, what does the world look like from the European context? Have we got examples of trade unions in other parts of Europe which have been brave enough to take on this task of organising undocumented migrants?
Yes, we have, but I think it's largely to do with the fact that in certain countries, politics, anti-migration politics, have reached such a high point that they've kind of been forced to. So we've had situations in Italy where there's been mobilization of the Unione Sindacale di Base, particularly regarding workers in the fields in the south. There's recently been migrants' own trade union set up, whose leader is Abubakar Sumahoko. I might have pronounced the name wrong, but that's something that's been happening. There's been more attention paid, this is from an academic side, to the plight of Sikh and Indian workers in the just south of Rome, in the Pontina area. And there's been organization of street sellers in Barcelona, which has done quite a good work, in particular with merchandising and with people showing their support. So there has been some activity, but it's largely been driven by how far right some of the activities of governments, particularly in Italy in 2018, 2019, it was particularly vocal in opposition to migrants. And that kind of helped trade unions to move towards a situation where not only it was an issue of migrant workers, but it was also an issue of trying to work to make sure that second generation, young people who were born and grew up in Italy, kind of should acquire some rights that they're currently denied. Okay. So there has been some movements. And I see there's also a message here from Zrinka Bralo saying that migrant workers are also organizing their own unions in different cases. So there has been a little bit of a move of trade unions towards supporting migrant workers, at the same time as migrant workers have sometimes got a bit fed up and they kind of took to organizing these things on their own.
Okay. And in fact, the version of this event that our German comrades are organising, that's taking place tomorrow evening, is specifically going to be on the issue of work. What can be expected for migrants when they have to face up to the world of work in the post-COVID environment. So anybody who wants to follow up this discussion, I think that's they should certainly be doing that. If you want to look at it, if you want to know more about that event, have a look at the Twitter feed for the PPT, which is Migrant PPT London, at Migrant PPT London, and you'll see all the information about that there. Thanks a lot, panel. This has been really great. We're now in the last 5 minutes of our discussion. So I'm going to do what people traditionally do at this time of the year and ask each and every one of you to come up with the one thing that you would like to see happen during the course of 2021 that you think would significantly swing things in favour of what we're trying to do at the moment. Francis, I wonder if you'd like to try this one out first.
Yeah, trying to think of just one thing is difficult. I guess the first thing that comes to mind, and yeah, especially springing from the discussion that we've just had around kind of work and collectives, is organising, like continued and better and larger organising. And I think I apply that to the context in Northern France, in which, as I was saying, I think there's a lot of kind of structural and political impediments to people just being able to organise and collectivise amongst themselves. And so, yeah, I think I kind of see that as the way to better visibilise the situation, particularly in Northern France going forward, but I know also in the UK context, and I think there's a lot of examples, as we've spoken of tonight, about how that's been incredibly effective. And yeah, one in particular I was thinking of was the opposition or resistance to the recent changes to the UK immigration rules regarding criminalisation of rough sleepers. And I know there's a lot of organising going on around that between various different charities, grassroots groups, unions, and others. So yeah, I would hope to see more of that.
Okay, I cut you a bit of leeway there because you were the first one on, but I think you gave us about 3 things that you'd like to. I no doubt you'd have given us a lot more if we'd have let you go on. But the rest of you, it's one thing only. So, Dorothy, what is your one thing for 2021?
Well, I think the COVID-19 have shown us that essential workers are so important to everyone's lives. While everyone is shielding, you have essential workers that are continuing to deliver the food, put stuff on the shelves. So, and these essential workers are mostly migrants. So I would say that we have to demand more. And I always believe that being practical means demanding the impossible. So that should mean regularizing workers, giving people the right to cross borders and end the cycle of criminalization of migration, because it's not a migrant crisis. It's a crisis actually of the system that we have.
Okay, so your big wish is resolve the crisis of global capitalism. So that's a great ambition to have, and I'm sure we'd all put our hands up for that. Yasha, what's your big hope for 2021?
I think that was the main point. The point that Dottie made was exactly the point. The problem is policy. The problem's not migration. Migration's got positive, it's got some negative features as well. But the problem is policy, and that needs to come to a head at a time when the EU has deliberately been working to make people drown in the Mediterranean. That's quite bad. To deliberately degrade reception conditions for migrants and asylum seekers in the Greek islands just by concentrating the problem there. It's been a dogged, determined work just to make the situation as bad as possible, possibly worse than the conditions people were fleeing from, because that could be a good excuse to make them leave. But that shows, I mean, some recognition of the harm that this is doing to the countries which are implementing restrictive policies. That's the most important thing that needs to be acknowledged, and a lot of the population are acknowledging it. Because despite dogged efforts to stop rescue missions in the Mediterranean, for example, they keep on coming. Now we've got 10 different boats which have been stopped by Italy on spurious grounds, not to let them document what's happening and not to let them go and act the rescues that might bring some people they save into Europe. And at the same time, although they keep on impounding boats, etc., on Sunday there was a new one which came out. It's called Rescue. It's just started. There's a new initiative. When it was European people doing it from other countries, then the authorities said, no, there's a problem because of the nationality of these people. And an Italian one was set up.
Okay, so basically,
public determination is
keep on
good.
with these great initiatives that put people on the front line alongside migrants and refugees in the battle for their rights. Khadija, the last word for you. What should we be hoping for in 2021?
Is the recognition of all migrants in general, migrant and refugee, to be recognized and to be respected as all migrants, and the rights to be as the same all other workers, and the government to look at the struggle of all of them, because we've done a lot and then we send a lot of information, but still is not recognized. There is nothing still comes on. And then we will hope that this 2021 comes with the normal changes so people can have the normal life, and then we can go together again. And I'm happy to be with One in and go with United Union. And then we hoping that the struggle will be end, and that all migrants get the rights and to be recognized as workers.
Excellent. What a brilliant way to sum up this panel discussion, I think. I think the way I'd put that is workers of the world unite. Solidarity with migrant workers, solidarity for the fight for the struggle against exploitation right the way across the planet. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight, for helping us with this little UK effort to join in with our European comrades in marking International Migrants Day. It's only one day in the year, but it's going to carry on. I think we've made it quite clear that people who have joined us tonight, the ideas, the activism that exists in our movement means that it's not going to be a one-day event. We're coming up with ideas all over the place. Initiatives are being formed, projects are being got together, people are going out onto the front line. There is solidarity, solidarity, solidarity right the way along the lines. And if we keep up with that determination and that enthusiasm for the battles ahead, then surely we will win. So thank you all. Thanks for our panel, each and every one of you. You've been absolutely brilliant. Thanks to those of you who have asked questions in the chat box. And thank you for participating in this. Keep in touch with us. Our website is www.migranttribunal.org. Have a look at that. Have a look at our social media feeds. We're going to be doing more of this work in the future. So hopefully it won't be too long before we're all talking together in 2021.